interface where you can log in that way. The number, oh, you're ahead already. 341095. Now it's moving. Here we go. The question, how did you travel here today? This is a good warm-up, huh? Well, it's looking fairly good from a sustainable development perspective, right? Does anybody still have a problem with the Wi-Fi login? Okay. I'll read it out again so you can follow my directions. LU Guest Network as on the browser. And on the web page, you should get a question that asks for your registration by email or text. Well, I think we're going to settle for this. As you can see, it's looking fairly well for the in the aspects of sustainable development, but there is still room for some societal transformation. That is what we're going to talk about here today, how we could move things along according to the Sustainable Development Goals. In this transition, we all need innovation, right? We do need facilitating changes of systems, we need the development of economic models, etc., and we all have that represented here in the room, those capacities, and with the people following us online on the webcast. It requires academic input, and of course this is what we have here. Some practical information for the breaks. The lavatories are downstairs. The emergency exits is one over here and one in the back. Two in the back in this corner, and the Wi-Fi we went over already. All right. With no further ado, I'd like to welcome the real host of today, the Vice Chancellor of Lund University, Torbjörn van Schans. Give him a warm hand, please.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to this conference about how centers of excellence can contribute to societal transformation for a sustainable future. I would also like to take the opportunity to welcome our invited speakers, Heikki Manila, Jessica Connor, Babs Vandenberg, and Katarina Rolfsdotter Jansson. Lund University has the considerable advantage of being a comprehensive university with education and research in most disciplines. I often say that we would be able to build up a new society from scratch. Today's global societal challenges require not only in-depth subject knowledge, but also combined expertise from different subjects. The breadth of education and research is a unique asset in this context. At Lund University, there is a long tradition of collaboration across subject boundaries. Extensive, successful, and long-term collaborations exist between medicine, engineering, and science, and also between social sciences, economics, the humanities, and law. There is an enormous potential. The societal challenges are highly complex. Many actors are affected, and processes in nature, society, technology, and behavior are linked together. Knowledge from one limited area is not enough for making well-founded decisions. It requires collaboration across sectors and subject boundaries. The broad university has an increasingly important role to play, but this requires that we can create and maintain strong collaboration across boundaries. When we were to select a purpose at the university level for utilizing a previous financial surplus, we chose to start a graduate school focusing on societal challenges and Agenda 2030. It is very satisfying that this is now underway. 17 doctoral students have been admitted. Research and education are powerful tools for change. The university has a central role in work on societal challenges and can offer knowledge in the transition. Things move forward on the research front through the independent and driven work that takes place in research teams and at departments. This requires a good working environment and long-term conditions. This is a challenge in our competitive environment, but something to which we can all contribute. Even though research is pursued in a tough competition, we are not to forget that we are each other's work environment. Over the years, a very strong research environments have been created at Lund University, including our 12 strategic research areas. These areas focus resources on tackling important societal challenges. They have contributed to the strong development of research, both at the university and nationally. The strategic research areas have also developed into important platforms for collaboration and innovation, and have contributed to making clear societal impacts. The strategic research areas are highly valued by the university. These environments have also taught us a lot about cross-boundary activities and the challenges posed by collaborations across boundaries. Today, we will discuss important issues with a bearing on all our futures. I look forward to today's discussions and wish you all a pleasant afternoon. Thank you very much and very welcome.
Thank you very much, Toba Forchans. We will now have 4 presentations, and after each presentation, you are able to ask questions to the speakers via the app. So please stay on the Mentimeter app and you just post your questions. And the rest of the questions that we cannot take, that we might not fit after each lecture, we'll take into the panel discussion. So please stay active with your questions. And now I'd like to introduce the next speaker, the Pro Vice Chancellor for Research and Research Infrastructure, Professor Stacey Risinma Sørensen. Please give her a warm hand.
Thanks very much, and nice to see so many people here. So my purpose in this presentation is to give a little bit of background about the whole program, especially the Strategic Research Area program in Sweden. This provides kind of a backdrop for the main topic today, and I'll try to also connect this to the development goals that were discussed during the morning. So, strategic research areas in Sweden can be a way to catalyze excellent research. It can also be a way to stimulate education. It could be a way also to show from the Swedish perspective what we're good at, but also maybe from outside to even lift Swedish research into the international context. So there were many different goals that were in focus when the Strategic Research Area program was launched. Sustainability was maybe not one of the main goals, but at least at that time the challenges for society were connected to all of the areas that were identified for this program. We heard just that interdisciplinary research is also an important component in our strategic research areas. So when this was launched, which was in connection with the research bill more than 10 years ago, so 12 years ago, it was going to be a long-term and strategic investment. And at that time, we had 2 programs that were long-term that were very large scale, and there were many other funding agencies which also had focused on centers of excellence and centers which could be, say, from 5 to 10 years. So this was a period, say, within Swedish research policy where there were a lot of large investments that were made in research mainly. And this longer term, so 6 to 10 years, was also something that was uncommon before that. But around 2006, this started to be one of the main ways to channel new money into the research system, and also to catalyze, I think, a new way to do research. So this long-term aspect was very important. And for this particular program, trying to develop profile areas for research, especially areas that would be of benefit to society. And a goal, even at the time when it was announced, was to stimulate education, although how that should be done was not really specified. But also, this should be built on research at universities, and it should be at the highest international level. This should really profile the strengths of Swedish research. So the framework for this was first that the government identified a certain number of areas, actually a rather large number of areas, where strategic research investments would be made. And finally, 43 different centers of excellence were funded through this program. And about 5 billion Swedish crowns was allocated over a 10-year period. And so I guess about 500 million euros. And this is maybe not a large amount in the context of some other countries, but I think for Sweden, this was really one of the biggest such programs that had ever been created. And previous programs had been initiated mainly by the research funders, and this was actually on the government level, which was also kind of an unusual way to do this. And I think this also challenged, in a way, the university's perspective on what role should the government have in trying to move research at the universities in a certain direction. So this was not an uncontroversial step. And for Lund, who we just heard, was very successful in several of these different national competitions, whether they were done on the government level or on the level of a single or combined funding agency. We had, at the end of 2010, received funding for roughly 30 different centers of rather different character. The Linné projects were 10-year programs, and they were sort of like a large research project involving many groups, but still quite centered on research and more or less handled by researchers. Whereas the strategic research areas, they had a completely different sort of dignity within this landscape. And these were really, they were applied for by the vice chancellors of the universities, and there should be also a discussion on trying to identify which researchers should really be involved in these, and how to highlight the university's research. And again, Lund was very, very successful, receiving 9 grants coordinated by Lund University, and 8 of those involved other universities. And then Lund was also part of 3 other grants that went to other universities. So this also was a step from the Linnaeus program, which mainly involved a single university, to trying to open up, identify gaps that could be filled by researchers from another university, and also starting to work in, I think, a new way together with other researchers. But this was also a challenge, I think, for us as a university, for university management, and probably also to understand how should we structure this within our faculties and departments. How should we really work with these? So for Lund, it's about 200 million Swedish crowns per year, and presently the Swedish research areas that we work in, we have a large number, so I guess about 58% of personnel within our strategic research area grants. They are within medicine, medical research. about 27% within engineering, roughly 13% within climate, and only 2% within social sciences and humanities. So this, I think, also reflects another, maybe controversial aspect, is that we weren't really able to engage a lot of humanities and social sciences in these programs, which actually were also aimed at societal challenges, where I think these areas are clearly of high value. And they involve quite a large number of researchers within Lund University. I think about 20% of our researchers are one way or another included in one or even more than one strategic research area. And we've also seen that a lot of PhDs are awarded within these different areas. So within medical and life science, 557 over the period 2010 to 2018. 2010 was the first year of this grant, so things have developed since then. Within climate, 47, engineering, 159, and social sciences, 6 degrees have been awarded over this period. But what do these areas really mean for Lund University? From the beginning, research of the highest quality, so our best researchers went together and they wrote these applications, and already the areas that were identified should be of high value for society. But how to really engage on a broad level, researchers from different parts of the university, researchers from different universities in order to address these challenges, but also to be able to respond to changes that take place. For example, the coronavirus. This developed very rapidly, and we need to have a way to be able to quickly address these issues and quickly also communicate on a national level. And then it's also become clear that these strategic research areas, which I may start calling more and more centers of excellence, they shouldn't just be about research. We've been talking about societal challenges, we've been talking about impact, but also education has to be a central part of this. And maybe that's not always obvious, how education and stimulated education, developing education close to these research areas, what mechanisms we actually have when the investment goes into research. And these areas are also, I think, rather well funded in the sense that they can provide very attractive environments, but also attractive resources for recruiting new people, both PhD students and also staff. But they also can maybe take a risk and conduct research, look at very ambitious goals, and try to do something that you wouldn't usually attempt to do on a 3 or 4 year research contract. And being able to engage a lot of different researchers with different skills and different networks is also, I think, a new aspect of this. So, as I said, a large number of researchers are involved, but about 70% of the staff in our strategic research areas are actually researchers, and 22% on the average over this 10-year period are PhD students. And this is not really legible for hardly even for me, but it was to really show that among all these different researchers, about 25% of the publications are in medicine. About 15% are, say, within biodiversity, genetics, molecular biology, and then almost all the rest are scattered among a huge number of different subjects. And I think this also represents the diversity of researchers within these different centers of excellence. And a lot, but not all, of the publications from our centers of excellence are with international collaborations, but these are the ones which are most well cited and seem to make the most impact, at least scientifically. But still, a certain percentage, about 20%, are only within Lund University, and this is actually quite surprising. And we can also look at the growth in terms of personnel within each of the individual centers that we have. And this diagram shows from the beginning, 2010, until today, how the number of staff have increased. And this number of staff includes PhD students. And in certain areas, so PhD students are hired for 4 to 5 years, and there may be actually a dip which takes place now, since the future funding of these centers is actually quite unclear at the moment. But in certain areas, for example, biocare, which is cancer research, the number of researchers has increased by something like a factor of 3 or 4. And this reflects, I think, maybe a different perspective of how to organize the environment. So there are many different perspectives on how, what kind of researchers should be involved, how should we set the borders for this, how open should they be, and how much should they focus on maybe research excellence or on a broader agenda. And this is just one way to show that they are very, very different just within Lund University. And this means also that the structure of these different centers of excellence is very different. The leadership is very different, and the strategies are also put together in different ways. And many of these centers of excellence evolved from many years of working together. Some of them were also rather active within the Linnaeus programs, but a few of them really started from zero in 2010. And I think here there's been a quite significant and very important development to bring together researchers who hadn't worked together before this strategic research area program was launched. And I think those are maybe some of the most interesting cases to look at. But today's topic has to do with the Sustainable Development Agenda. So I thought I would say a couple words on this. One of the organizations that's really been pushing this, so developing the agenda and pushing it through, is the United Nations. Maybe they're not a model for being efficient and having clear interfaces towards research, but they have a clear interface towards society. But they've had quite a lot of focus on how to create a more efficient dialogue with researchers in order to influence policy. And there was, in December, there was a conference that addressed this rather directly. And a few of the conclusions that came from that conference had to do with how universities really align to the Sustainable Development Agenda, and how to really optimize the way that university research can be taken in to different policy decisions, and also to be used in organizations such as United Nations, but actually many, many others. So it was very clear that key linkages between research and policy are often non-existent or usually not sufficient for good communication. But it was also clear that many research organizations, so universities, do actually align their goals with strategic development goals, and that they're often reflected in the agenda and strategies for universities. And then we heard this morning that probably this is true, but how much do we actually see this as a driving force for the direction of our research? And I thought it was maybe a good idea to say something about what do our centers of excellence actually look at, and to come up with a couple of examples that I thought were particularly relevant for the strategic development or sustainable development agenda. One of these is migration, and this was a prototype study for this United Nations report. And they found that, of course, migration, this requires lots of different disciplines. It requires not only an understanding of what kind of effects are driving migration, but also what kind of things can we do to mitigate and to understand that. And here you could see very clearly that collaborative research actually shows that you have to have from the beginning an interdisciplinary perspective, but if you really want the outcome of this research to make some impact, I think that there has to be a systematic way of channeling the research towards policymakers, which is embedded in the structures of the research organizations. So that the current collaboration schemes was kind of the result of many different initiatives that later on were brought together instead of having a systematic, structured approach to trying to, from the beginning, bring together different researchers and set a joint agenda. I think this is something that we could consider. Our centers of excellence, they do cut across subject and faculty borders. This picture shows for each of the 12 different centers of excellence, which say researchers or research groups from the different faculties are involved. And we can see in the blue column, which is medicine, there's the 5 different centers of excellence in medicine are certainly represented, but also several of the others are shown here, but perhaps there could be more. We see that social science is actually involved in quite a few different centers of excellence, even though one, the Middle East in the contemporary world, is the only one which is actually managed by the social sciences or placed within that faculty. But we see also that there are many faculties who are not a part of our centers of excellence. And I think this is something that Lund University has to consider. How can we open up? How can we utilize other parts of the university in order to make sure that our results are communicated and that we understand how to use them? But for Lund University, it's also important that each of the centers of excellence has goals and strategies which align to our vision. So for Lund, these profile areas are really central to, say, realizing our own vision. And that, as we heard, we have now a research school focusing on the Agenda 2030. And so the agenda, the intersection of the goals of many of our centers of excellence and the agenda makes it also align more or less automatically with our own goals. But we still need to see how this can really lead to some impact. And we're not just using buzzwords, as we heard this morning. So for Lund, it's important to come up with a strategy for how should we work with our centers of excellence? What expectations do we have? And how can we ensure that they work to develop our own strategic goals? We need to also, I think, on at least some level, be aware of the strengths and weaknesses within the centers of excellence, but also which areas we do not address, that we maybe do have the capacity to address that are not within the formal centers. And through all the experience that we have with the Linnaeus centers, other programs, and the Strategic Research Initiative, we have a lot of experience on how to work in these kind of environments. Not only the structure and organization, but also the leadership and how to renew the agenda and renew the strategies. So I think this is something that we also need to acknowledge and to work on how we can use this in the future. This morning, there was quite a bit of discussion about communication, both within the university and also how we can communicate outside so that these centers can be visible, but also about leadership and responsibility. And very briefly, the expectations that Lund University has for these centers cover a number of different points. We expect that there should be research that is developed and goals that are identified in a dialogue with society, in a dialogue with shareholders. And I think there's some areas where this is a very, very clear route, and others where those interfaces are really not very easy to identify and mechanisms are difficult. And we need to also develop a strategy that we actually use for communicating the research and the development both within the university and outwards. And then ensuring that research also stimulates education. A lot of steps have been taken in the last 5 years to identify what can be done easily and then what can be done maybe in a more intense dialogue with those who are actually teaching. So I think we're making a lot of progress there. And then leadership is important, and leadership is also a key to success here. But renewal, both of the agenda and the goals, the strategies for each of our strategic research areas, but maybe even being able to develop new areas which are not really on the list today is a challenge that we have to be able to meet. So we have worked now on a vision for our centers of excellence. The fact that they're interdisciplinary, as I showed, they involve many people from different faculties, from different departments. And this means that they don't fit into our usual, say, structures, which are the faculties at Lund University are very independent, and they, going across faculty borders and communicating, lifting these environments, there isn't really an obvious channel for that yet. So this has been one of the things that we have worked on developing in the last few years. And the collegium, as it's called, of the heads, the directors of our centers of excellence, has now also really formed a good dialogue with me and also with other parts of the university, but I think we can use that to engage a lot more researchers. And each of the centers of excellence has developed its own vision and strategy, which has been renewed every 5 years. And we've also discussed how to share responsibility, say, for recruitment and for developing further strategies and trying to understand what we need to strengthen. So we have also a communication channel called Mission is Possible that's focused only on the research which takes place within the strategic research areas or our centers of excellence. And these are a few of the topics that are developed there. You can find this on the web. And I wanted to show 2 cases which are very different centers of excellences, but actually seem to be maybe 2 sides of the same coin. Beck, which is focusing on biodiversity and ecosystem services in a changing climate. They integrate many, many different aspects, but they have also a very strong focus on societal interaction, creating meeting places, and also pilot studies for future projects that involve many stakeholders. And I think they have the most clearly defined need to actually have a dialogue with mainly local and regional and national authorities. So they have mechanisms to align research with the needs of society, and these are very clearly stated in their strategy. But we have also the Middle East and the Contemporary World Center, which also has a focus on natural resources and the environment, but coming from a very, very different point of view. And research topics here include use of water, hydropolitics, post-conflict, and also using digital techniques, so geographical information systems to improve efficient water use. And so this is also looking at natural resources, but from the point of view of governance and policy making. And I think it's actually quite interesting to see that both of these 2 are addressing the same kind of issues, but using a rather different part of the university. But both are equally important and probably making impact in very different ways. And I guess it's always interesting to see what's happened during the last 10 years. I showed the number of staff, but maybe it's also interesting to look at how publications have developed. And in fact, the number of publications at Lund University and even within the Centers of Excellence has actually decreased last year compared to the year before. But the most interesting thing here, I think, is that most of these centers have really increased the number of publications during this last period, and some of them with very, very dramatic amount, mainly due to rather different effects. In some cases, increasing the number of researchers, but in others also really deciding that in order to make impact, we need to work on a higher level, international publications, and to work in a very different way. So that was my background that I hope will provide a bit of a context for some of the discussions today from the Swedish and Lund point of view. And so thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Professor Stacey Ristin-Mas Sørensen. Let's see if we have any questions from Menti. I'm looking at Tina Trollos. She's the Menti moderator over here, also from the arranging committee. Let's see what questions. Will the Lund University SFOs exist in 2030?
Absolutely.
That's a short and sweet answer.
Well, they may not look like they do today, because I think a few things may have changed in the next 10 years, and we have to be able to address those new challenges, maybe by working together from the basis that we have now defined in our centers of excellence. But I think we probably also have to demonstrate that we can work on developing new groups that will work on other issues which we don't have on the horizon today.
Thank you. How do you see the future of the SFO funding at Lund University?
At the moment, we have the situation that the SFO funding is mainly coming directly from the government, and from year to year we wonder, will this be the same next year or not? And the government has also pointed out which areas we can use this money for. So together with the lack of, say, control of this money and its future, we're in the hands of the government. So I think the best scenario is that the money comes to Lund University and that we can continue to use this for this kind of strategic research. And then the question is, if many of our centers of excellence today involve other universities, how will we do that in the future when Lund University, Gothenburg, Uppsala, and the other universities also have received this money as part of their block grant?
I have a question. What would you say is the main challenge or the main challenges in creating centers of excellence at the university?
Well, so far we've always done this in response to a government call. In this case, they pointed out the areas. In earlier cases, they've been maybe broader areas, but it's always been somebody else putting the bag of money on the table. And then it's not easy, but it's something we know how to do. We know how to put together good researchers who sit down and come up with a great idea to get money. But if we want to actually do that within Lund University, I think it's going to be a huge challenge for us.
In what way?
Well, to be able to define the criteria and to define the areas where we think we want to develop, or we can develop the ones we have today, or we can develop new ones, but to really take control of that ourselves, I think will be a big challenge.
I have one more question. I think we're running out of the Menti questions. The main challenges in ensuring sustainability work in these centers of excellence.
Well, I think that so these centers of excellence had research in focus, and we heard that also this morning. And maybe it's easy to say that, say, cancer or diabetes, these are really important diseases, and just by doing research here, we will be helping society at some point along the way.
Tangible, very tangible. Yeah.
But I think if we could come up with a strategy that's integrated in the way that we work, that can address this in a more specific and concrete way. I think, as I pointed out, this does exist within a couple of our strategic research areas, but I think we need to consider how we could do that and what we need to do that, what gaps there are, much more than we've done so far, if we really want to do that. Maybe it's not an issue, maybe not all of these centers of excellence are the right ones to do that, but certainly some of them I think are extremely well poised for making a huge difference.
Well, thank you very much for your presentation and for answering all our questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Finland has worked with the Centers of Excellence for quite a while. So we're very happy to have a very prominent person from Finland who will talk about their experiences and the evaluation of their work in Finland. We have with us Professor Heikki Manila. He has been president of the Academy of Finland since 2012. Manila is known for his research in data mining and has published highly cited papers on association rule learning and sequence mining. Please give him a warm hand.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and thanks for inviting me here. It's always a pleasure to be in Lund. To start with, I was for a long time a professor at the University of Helsinki and worked also as a research director in one of the institutes. So how many of you know what is the common connection between the University of Dorpat in Estonia, University of Lund University, and University of Helsinki? Swedish background. Yeah, Swedish background. All these are examples of Swedish regional politics from the 1600s. So all these universities were established in newly conquered or otherwise isolated areas. Lund, Dorpat, University of Helsinki, well, it was established in Turku, but let's not talk too much about that. So that just is an example of kind of how long effect certain decisions can actually have. It's kind of countries have come and gone, but these universities still stay. So what I'm going to talk to you about is about the answer to the, I think, an excellent question that was posed to me when I was asked to talk here. Which funding mechanisms have been successful in helping universities to focus on sustainability and grand societal challenges? So I work at the Academy of Finland, which has a misleading name. It should be called the Finnish Research Council. So we are basically Vetenskapsrådet and Formas and some of covering all areas of science. So what I'm going to tell you about are some of the experience we have in Finland in basically the question of how to kind of achieve focusing or kind of concentrating resources in certain areas. So it's a general discussion on the type of funding mechanisms and not that much of connection specifically to sustainability, although I'll refer to that now and then. I'll start by talking about money. You know, the representative of a research funding agency talks now and then about research, but always about money. So I'll talk about money. So where's the money? That's always the question. Then about universities and change, which actually already in Stacey's talk actually came up in several cases, that okay, how do universities change? And what are the important decisions when universities change? Then I talk about the role of funding agencies with examples, and then come actually back to universities in the end. So let's talk about money. First of all, in Finland, as in Sweden, we have block funding and then outside funding. For us, the block funding to the universities, it comes as really a lump sum to each of the universities. It is actually clearly the largest part of the public funding to research and higher education. It's this here 1.7 billion euros per year directly to universities. And the universities, it's divided according to a funding model. How many publications, how many degrees, and so much, how much outside funding and whatever. Universities on their own decide where to use it. So universities in Finland are autonomous legal entities. Through the Academy of Finland is about 400 million. Then Business Finland, our innovation fund, or our Vinnova in a way, it's about 500 million. Most of that goes to companies. But as it's obvious here, it's really the sort of the basic funding of the universities. That covers about 50% of their research expenditures. If I've understood correctly, in Sweden it's about 44% and in Lund about 42%. So we have a slightly larger part coming from the block funding. For us, that ratio has actually been reasonably stable in the last 5 to 6 or to 7 years. So always kind of I keep looking at this picture and basically the idea that okay, there is this 1.8 billion, actually this year it's closer to 1.9 billion of funding, which is the sort of main component in our funding system. Well, let's now think that okay, what are the important decisions that are made when using this money? So the question we had is that okay, what funding mechanisms have been successful, and how actually does a university focus on something, and how do universities change what they are doing? Many of us, I think most of us have kind of had a longer or shorter careers in the time when research funding in Scandinavia, in Western Europe, grew year after year. So we, or at least we got used to this idea that okay, how to plan for next year? Let's do everything we do this year, and then something nice, some nice new stuff with the new money we are going to get. In Finland, we had a big depression in early 1990s, and when in 94 it started to kind of lift, then government started raising funding, and it's a modeller's dream. The funding increased in a nice linear way all the way until 2012. And we all learned that, okay, the way to do planning is to do everything we've done so far, and then some nice new things. When the budget turned out to be flat, it was a complex thing. All of a sudden, if we wanted to do something new, we had to stop doing something we are now doing. And that, as you all know, is not easy at all. It's not easy in universities, it's not easy in companies. So, for example, companies where growth stops, they often end up in difficulties for exactly the same reason. So change is often difficult, and I think Stacey's discussion of what has happened in Sweden perhaps can be also viewed in the context of this. But let's get now to the important decisions that, okay, when the university has money, what are the important decisions? There are three things, not in any specific order. It's recruiting professors, recruiting staff, recruiting students. Everything else is secondary. It's all about people. Recruiting professors, recruiting students, recruiting staff is the key thing in the universities. And those decisions actually, they have a very long-term effect on what is going to happen at the university. So it's really about the basics of research and education and innovation policy is that, okay, you need talented people and adequate working conditions for them. If you got those, everything else is in a way secondary. So recruiting professors and recruiting students, recruiting staff, that is the key thing. But it's actually also a key thing in terms of committing resources. Namely, when you hire permanent personnel, that's where you kind of commit resources. So let's make a simple computation. The numbers can be different, but let's say 20 years, hire one professor who is 45 years of age, and you expect her or him to work for 20 years at the university. So 20 years for salary, then the direct costs about 50%, then the indirect cost or overheads, that might be 100% of all that. Premises, everything else, it actually is quite expensive. Perhaps you give a salary to a PhD student or even a postdoc. You very easily come to something like 250,000 or €500,000 per year. So hiring a professor is a commitment of, let's say, 5 to 10 million euros, which is actually quite a lot of money. And in that way, the way the university commits to something, both intellectually and financially, is through recruiting permanent people. Last week I talked with the rector of the University of Vaasa in Finland, which is a tiny university, really small. It has altogether 50 professors. But what I was very happy to hear, and I asked him that, okay, can I quote there? They've now, in the last 2 years, they've hired 6 professors in the area of energy and sustainability. And you think of that commitment that, okay, they've done this, more than 10% of their professors they've decided that, okay, this is what they are one of the things they are going to do. They have 3 things they are going to do, especially actively. This is one. And the commitment is, at least percentage-wise, it's quite a lot, hiring 6 professors for them. All right, ladies and gentlemen, so the basic point here is, of course, that talking about funding agencies, I think I like to talk about funding agencies and universities and research institutes always in combination. Looking at the whole system is more important, is useful when trying to figure out what should be done. But now let's go to the funding agencies. So there's lots of different types of funding, as you all know, from funding agencies. There is for individual researchers or small research groups. I'll cover that very briefly. Then about for competence cluster centers of excellence or flagships, or for universities as a whole. So first of all, looking at funding individual researchers or small groups, what I think has been the case in Sweden and in Finland, we've had, for sustainability-related themes, have had lots of research programs, getting about 10 million euros for a certain fairly wide theme, having applications, international peer review, ending up funding about 10 projects, each getting for 4 years a total of about 1 million euro. So that has been actually quite important in the Finnish sustainability and climate-related research. We started doing this already in late 80s, and it has gone on after that. And it's actually has been a way of role, or has had a big role in renewal. Then we have also in our normal thematically open funding, these days we ask the people to say, what are the connections to SDGs, if any? So a pure mathematician can write dash. Somebody can say that, okay, this and this. What the desirable outcome is that the researcher might think, well, actually I could look at these SDGs. There are those people in the next fall, they are doing something like that. Perhaps I should talk to them. We have seen some examples of that. Of course, there is the undesirable outcome is that somebody tries just to whitewash, well, I work in computer science and it's very important for climate. Certainly, yes, it's very important for climate. And I'll work that out when you give me some money. So that's not really what we want. But this sort of thing that, okay, thematically organized small programs or the open funding, asking about certain things. This asking about certain things like SDGs, or a few years ago we started asking about open availability of publications. There are small nudges to a certain direction. This open availability of publications has actually worked quite well. But let's move on So Stacy was already talking a lot about centers of excellence, SRAs, which we don't have in Finland. I'll use the term competence clusters, which is not a very good term, but I hope it will become clear what I mean by that. So why are we talking about these kind of things? The reason is the change in the way science is being done. Traditionally, there was this lonely genius who made everything by her or himself, and nobody helped. Now the idea is that, okay, anything or most of the research, especially connected to sustainability, you have a multidisciplinary theme representing many areas and lots of collaborations from one to another. For a center of excellence, what I mean is that it's a kind of a collection of interconnected groups, typically with a strong emphasis on research, and the goal is excellence and impact in and through research. The competence clusters is really about the same, but with the difference that there is many different types of actors present. So might be research groups, small and large companies, research institutes, educational units, and so on. And in these, education or innovation or building competencies are more prominent in the agenda. So to look at the two pictures. So a traditional idea of a center of excellence was that, okay, there were research groups, perhaps using one or several research infrastructures. The research groups might be from one area, but typically from many different disciplines. But then everybody else was a little bit on the outside. Whereas the competence clusters are kind of a more mixed bag, that, okay, the non-governmental organizations and the companies, other types of organizations might be more there, and it's a competence center is not perhaps working so much as a whole to get towards a single goal, but it might be more kind of having a separate but interconnected goals and aims. All right. One question which actually came up in the questions a little bit is this, that, okay, actually, why do we have to support the centers of excellence? So why don't they just grow on their own? Researchers notice that interdisciplinarity is useful for high quality science, so why doesn't it happen? I think the question is one of the key things in the rest of my talk, is basically that the problem of change requires a little bit of a nudge, some sort of bridge funding. Everybody is always very busy, and really sort of building a new collaboration, it takes time, it takes energy, it takes money, and if you don't have the added incentive of getting a little bit of extra new money, it might be that you don't have enough time and energy to do that. So the idea of bridge funding, how to get some activities started, is an important thing. What I really here like to emphasize is the commitment of the host institution. So from the point of view of a funding agency, what we want to do is stuff that the international peer evaluators are enthusiastic about, and which the rector of the university is also very enthusiastic about. We want the university to commit on the large-scale activities that the funding agency is funding. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'll look at 3 examples, talk briefly about centers of excellence of the Academy of Finland, then about Finnish flagships, and then about funding for strengthening university research profiles. The common themes in all these are that no pre-selected themes, so it's in the themes or topics of the research, it's completely bottom-up. International peer review, of course, and competitive funding, but bottom-up and peer review. So our centers of excellence are kind of, I think, more or less normal Scandinavian centers of excellence. I know that we've looked into Sweden earlier at this, and also other places. The evaluation criteria, basically the scientific quality and innovativeness, renewal, the added value that, okay, how much does it help? We currently have 26 of those. We give them about 1 million euros per year per center of excellence. Now it's for 8 years. And the sustainability related research is actually reasonably well represented there. So this for us, the Center of Excellence program has gone on at least 25 years or about 25 years. So they kind of are there. So our yearly commitment is about 30 million euros per year to this. A much newer thing is the flagship program, which we launched 2 years ago. The basic criteria here are 4 things. Excellent science, already demonstrated large societal impact, capability for renewal, and the commitment of the host institution. The already demonstrated societal impact can be of any type. So it implies that the flagships have an existing connection to other types of institutions. They might be a part of a competence center or like that. The evaluation had quite many steps. If you want to ask questions from the next speaker, she was one of our panelists who did an excellent job there. I'm very happy about that. The funding we give is about 4 million euros per year per flagships. The host institutions were initially required to give at least 2 or 3 times of this, really to show us the money. These run for 8 years, and now they've started basically last year their operations. We ended up funding 6 flagships, so it's about 25 million euros per year. The themes you see there, and really the point that these themes there was no pre-selection, that okay, it was completely bottom up, and the panelists and our decision makers decided which ones got the funding. There was actually a lot of discussion. People asked me that, okay, Heikki, when are you going to select the themes? I said, never. I'm not going to touch the themes at all. And I think these ones were actually, was a nice result, really, that okay, we got the power of peer review, got some extremely interesting stuff like this invest in equalities interventions and new welfare state, headed by a sociologist from the University of Turku. Extremely interesting and very high impact. So the basic criteria were very well met. Really, the power of peer review is here important. No thematic choices ex ante. The commitment of the host institutions exceeded our expectations. So it was actually 6 times the Academy Finland. So we asked for 2 or 3 times. The universities gave 6 times, which is nice. Good. And finally, I'm running out of time. The third part is funding for strengthening university research profiles, where the idea is that no university does everything in research. It doesn't have to do everything, but whatever it does, it should be done well. We've always made choices. So when deciding, University of Helsinki has, I think, 15 professors or 18 professors of mathematics. Rutgers University has 84. So we've always made choices. So Coming back to my recruiting theme, again, that the question when asking whether a university is an attractive environment, when I've tried to hire people to a university, the first question they always ask is, who else is there? And the second question is, what do the students know? And what we did on this competitive funding for strengthening university research profiles is providing a way for the leadership in the universities to get bridge funding to start new or strengthen existing or new research areas. This has been running since 2015. The basic idea is that the university applies for funding for the themes it wants to excel in. The university decides those completely on its own. Then the proposals are evaluated by an international panel, rectors and vice rectors from outside Finland, typically from Scandinavia or Northern Europe. And the panel is supported by data about universities. They interview the rectors of the universities. And the key question is, how realistic are the goals? Here we give about 50 million euros per year, so which is about 3% of the direct university funding. And this has actually been very good, for example, in emphasizing the sustainability themes in the research. But the basic idea really is that, bridge funding to start new things in the area of flat budgets. All right, to wrap up the questions, where's the money, the important decisions, basically recruiting, and then the different roles of funding agencies. And perhaps my final point is the most important. I find it very useful when universities and funding agencies talk about these things together. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Let's see what we have from the Menti application. How does the AOF ensure sufficient funding for infrastructure?
That is an excellent question, and also there the sort of commitment of the host institutions is crucial. So in that way, that our new infrastructure strategy, it emphasizes ownership. That a university or a collection of universities owns an infrastructure. It means that they are kind of committed to taking care of that. But infrastructure funding is not sufficiently large in Finland, and this is actually a problem.
Next question. Interesting about the Finnish view on funding, centers of excellence and flagships. I wonder about the ratio of external to university funding in Finland. It decides how much universities can do.
So for funding which goes to research, so the universities get half of the research funding as a lump sum, and half comes from outside sources. About 22% from the Academy of Finland, rest from EU, Business Finland, and so on.
How do you exemplify commitment from host institutions? Words, visibility, administration, money.
Well, this is kind of really, of course, for example, in the flagships, the universities, they sign a contract that, this is what we agree on. And it's really that, we want to see the clear plan that, how the commitment of the university is, how the financial commitment of the university is going to be carried out.
Is it detailed, this commitment?
Sorry?
How detailed is it?
Well, it's reasonably detailed in that, and we of course ask the heads of for example, the flagships that, have you seen the money? And if they say yes, then everything is fine.
Okay. Let's take one final question. Is scientific excellence jeopardized by adhering to the SDGs? Could this conflict affect future external funding for the excellence centers?
We've talked a lot about this for asking, let's say, our normal funding, asking about the possible connections to SDGs. I hope that the formulation is clear enough that the pure mathematician, who is always used as an example, that she or he doesn't have to write something kind of doesn't have to invent something which is not really a part of her or his research, but really the idea that okay, I think it's good if the researcher spends 10 minutes thinking of the possible connections and then can still write that okay, none.
Well, thank you. There are more questions coming up, but we'll be saving them for the panel discussion. I have something saved here in the corner for you, Professor Manila. It is a goodie bag with goodies from Lund. To be enjoyed, well, whenever. Thank you very much. Thank you. Oh, that's not easy. The next speaker is a world-renowned academic in her field with over 100 academic publications. She is accountability for delivery of the university's Global Strategy 2020 for World-Changing Research and will now enlighten us about the work with Centers of Excellence conducted at the University of Nottingham, titled The Beacons of Excellence. Lund University has a strategic partnership with the University of Nottingham, as you might know. Please give a warm hand to Professor Dame Jessica Corner.
Thank you very much. Really great to be here with you and enjoying being in Lund. So I'm going to talk a bit about the other side of the party, really, starting from the point of view of what universities themselves can do in relation to addressing sustainability goals, and our Beacons of Research Excellence programme, which has been absolutely about doing that. I don't know whether many of you know where Nottingham is. It's a middle-sized city, about 150 miles north of London, in the east of the country, in the Midlands, and it's in one of the so-called levelling up areas of England that our new Prime Minister is promising to look after, given the communities have just voted them into government. So we're having a lot of attention at the moment from ministers who want to visit and see what they can do in our region. So moving into this agenda then, I wanted to start from the point of view of I'm a steward, in a way, of a research ecosystem in the university, which is made up of many different parts. It's made up of faculties, schools, subjects, disciplines, also things that we do to try and foster interdisciplinary research working. And over and on top of that, we developed a new initiative around Beacons of Research Excellence, which I'm going to tell you more about. But we're not alone in doing this. I mean, we've been hearing from Heikki and yourselves. But this idea of thinking about a way of large-scale, challenge-led research, interdisciplinary research entities is kind of the order of the day. I mean, this is Horizon Europe and Mariana Mazzucato's ideas that are being taken up into a new Horizon Europe program around mission-oriented research programs. We have the DARPA agency in the United States, which doesn't necessarily have the end goal in mind, but it's certainly targeting research at very defined areas. And National Science Foundation have actually said that convergence research is one of the 21st century's 10 big ideas for them, which is about integration across multiple fields that were once very, very distant and distinct disciplines, actually is required in order to tackle some of the most challenging issues of our day, in order to catalyse different scientific discovery and innovation. And actually, because of these fields that need to come together, whether it's big data, whether it's artificial intelligence, whether it's genomics, whether it's a whole range of different issues, actually are required by most things in order to have them underpinning the way we're going to look at things for the future. So these are important ideas. And in a way, what we were working on was the idea of how do you develop convergence research in a large, complex university. And it's also something about what is the core purpose of universities in the 21st century. And addressing sustainability has to be at the very heart of our missions. We have enormous capabilities that we can bring to bear on these very difficult but tractable problems of the 21st century. And really, and I think actually Heikki was just saying this from the point of view of the Finland Academy, universities are increasingly expected to be coherent actors in the mix and not just recipients of funding. We need to act strategically in a clear and deliberate way in order to address challenges. So there's something about redoubling our efforts collectively and pursuing these goals of sustainability in a world that is absolutely needing that. So at the University of Nottingham, we set out to establish a programme of beacons of research excellence. These weren't meant to be just the bringing together of capabilities in research like you would perhaps in an institute or aligning areas together. It was actually to invite groups of academics who are already world-leading in their respective fields to bring together mission-driven, transdisciplinary research entities, to create them with a very deliberate approach to address global challenges around sustainability goals. They needed to be strategic in focus, challenge-led, ambitious, and aspire to become one of these beacons. They needed to think very big and explore way beyond what the university could ever provide for these groups of academics to do. And we asked them to think about the mission that they would pursue and what would they need if they were going to fulfill it, and how and what would that look like. And in the end, we chose 6 areas. In fact, Stacey Sorensen was on the panel back in 2016, where we brought together a panel of international and senior advisors to look at all the possible areas we could have created in a beacon, and in the end we chose 6. And I want to tell you a little bit about the timeline and the process that we've gone through to establish these beacons. It didn't happen all at once. There was a sort of phased approach. They didn't all develop at the same pace. They needed to put proposals together. They needed to form business cases that the university would feel were appropriate. We set them off with some enabling funding, because to go from a standing start to an established entity is quite difficult in short order. And then we set them off. And we're now in this process of beginning to look at what's come out of the programme and thinking about what does it take to establish these as sustainable entities embedding in the university where we think that they are going to be successful in the long term. And it's been quite an interesting journey, and reflecting back, we have thought of probably 4 different stages in the evolution of these beacon entities. There was the start-up phase, selecting them and setting them up, identifying, importantly, a single accountable leader who would be responsible for the beacon, the programme, and their colleagues. There was a next stage, which the beacons are largely just coming through to the other side of now, which was establishing themselves, which was about putting the capabilities, people, activities, facilities, equipment together in order to be able to go after this particular scientific or other programme that they were going to pursue. The thing that actually surprised me was actually how difficult it seems to be for the beacons to be very clear about what that scientific programme was and what was the mission that they were actually really going to be facing into. It seemed to take this sort of iterative process between the core group going out to academics, getting them to come together, getting them to identify projects, initiatives and things they wanted to do. And from that, kind of beginning to shape what this mission was and the program that they were going to pursue. And the more developed of the beacons are now in this third phase, where they're now actively working to fulfill the mission. And we can begin to see what are the outcomes that have come out of that. And then we're looking in the next 2 years to how we will shift towards making them sustainable entities within the university. Where might they sit? How do they find themselves to be self-financing? What do they evolve into in terms of large, sustainable, very significant, we hope, and externally funded mission-driven entities until they've fulfilled the thing that they set out to do, if that's feasible. So I thought I'd just quickly give you some examples of them so you can get a feel for the sort of things that these beacons are doing. Rights Lab was one of our earliest. Interestingly, it's very much at its heart a social science-driven beacon, which says that it doesn't always and only have to be about a sort of STEM-based or science-based subjects. This group have set out to contribute to ending modern-day slavery, which is a goal for the United Nations to be ended by 2030. And at the moment, there's an estimate there's over 40 million people around the world who are currently enslaved and can't escape their circumstances. So this group has set out to make a very significant contribution to that, to become the largest group of researchers working in this field in the world, and to build a strong research platform that can address the issues that need to be uncovered in order to address modern slavery. And they are addressing these series of questions in order to underpin those efforts. And they've developed a number of flagship data-driven projects that allow for this activity to be taken forward. They are the developers of the Global Slavery Index, for example, which can chart and measure the number of estimates of enslaved people in countries around the world, and that's been adopted by the United Nations. They are using satellite imagery, working with geospatial engineers to map particular activities that can be seen from space around the world in order to make much more clear estimates around this area. They've also been collecting testimonies from individuals who have experienced modern slavery, so that we can understand the impact on individuals and so forth. They're developing policy, investigating legislation, and are being partly funded by the UK government in order to do policy-related evidence work. And so far, and they are in their 2.5 years old, numerous achievements that we can see from them in terms of the different things that they've been doing. Very exciting work and very innovative that they've been doing, and definitely, absolutely addressing global sustainability goals. Future Food is another beacon which is set out to address food sustainability and work on a whole programme of activities in relation to this. As it happens, the University of Nottingham has a large farm of 500 acres. It has a dairy, has plant sciences, it has a vet school. So it has many of the things that you might want to have around you if we were going to address issues of food sustainability. And we also have campuses in China and Malaysia, activities in sub-Saharan Africa, and partnerships elsewhere that can enable us to do this kind of work. So Future Food are creating this integrated platform to facilitate impact across global food systems and address food security. And they have 4 areas in which they're looking at their work. from future-proofing agricultural systems to looking at micronutrients in food to thinking about sustainable livelihoods from farmers and how can that be enhanced and increased in lower middle income countries. And thinking about smart manufacturing of food as well. So a whole range of activities. And just a couple of examples of projects. The cocoa production projects are very interesting in that they're working with small cocoa producers in Colombia to connect them directly to niche chocolate makers in our city of Nottingham, so that they are being able to eliminate the sort of middleman from producing cocoa to chocolate production by assisting these farmers who are women to have a special signature that relates back to their own production by using metagenomics and metabolomics around the fermentation process for cocoa beans. And they're also thinking about other projects that relate to particular crops in sub-Saharan Africa, for example. Propulsion Futures is a third beacon, and this is working towards the propulsion system of the future, moving towards electric transport, and in particular the electrification of air flight, which is the biggest challenge of all, thinking about long-haul air flight that might one day actually be propulsed by electricity or combined with hydrogen or whatever instead of the current carbon fossil fuel model that we have today. And in Nottingham, we have the largest group of power electronic aeronautical engineers in the world. And they have got together with materials chemists to start working on a whole range of challenges, which is as difficult a challenge as it was to put a man on the moon in the NASA challenge, actually. And obviously, we're not, as a university, going to contribute to all of that, but our colleagues can do a number of things that will really begin to move this on. And they've chosen these 7 visions of areas in which they are going to be working in order to try and address this particular challenge. And interestingly, they also sit within one of the largest groupings of aerospace companies in the world, actually in the Midlands of the UK. And as that industry is going to be disrupted because the electrification agenda will change the kinds of products, companies, the supply chains, and so on, we'll need to support companies to reinvent themselves or create new supply chains of other companies in order to support what's going to be needed for the future. And we would very much like that to be able to stay in the UK rather than perhaps some of these industries moving elsewhere in the country, particularly pertinent for us in the context of Brexit and so forth. And again, this beacon is beginning to do some really exciting developments. The picture on the left here is our latest science minister, who visited only last week to come and see what we were doing. We're showing her a big Rolls-Royce engine, and our electrical engineers are showing her the kinds of equipment they're trying to make that will ultimately replace that kind of a propulsion system. So just before I finish, I thought I would just say a few things about what we've learned about the features of these beacons, because they have been built from within the university. We weren't responding to a funding call from an external agency. So it's helped us understand what are the things that make these work. What are they becoming? Well, the way they've been developed, they're certainly acting as an accelerator and a catalyst for the funding helps to catalyse, build capacity. It's supporting many academics to develop at every career stage, from the early beginning research career to the senior career. It's opening up and kind of coalescing facilities and equipment together to be used and put to a particular purpose. And it's creating these platforms for really high impact research. Crucial, though, has been the kind of leader that each of these beacons has had. We didn't appoint a leader, we asked a leader to come forward from out of the groupings. And they have become very special and important people that are exhibiting some really particular skills. And we're sort of characterizing this as a generous leader, a bit different from your sort of charismatic or directive leader that we might be used to in some more traditional research models. They need to be visionary and inspirational, but they also need to be sort of selfless about their own research. They sort of are convening and facilitating in a non-hierarchical way and building trust among whole groups of academics at every stage, fostering this interdisciplinary, collegiate action. They're fair, non-hierarchical, non-confrontational actually, and empathetic, great at negotiating with multiple partners and speaking with authority while not forefronting their own work. And that's why we've sort of characterised them. And these are the 4 of the beacons I've sort of talked to you about today. We've also thought about what are the features of success in addressing sustainability with actual impact and momentum. I think what we're doing here at Nottingham is creating these local to global critical mass platforms for convergence research. They are literally have a local hinterland around the university where we are, but they also have partnerships and activities that are spanning many countries of the world and collaborations with the best in the world, whether they be universities, companies or agencies. In the context of Rights Lab, it's NGOs, non-governmental organisations, for example. But they need to do this at sufficient scale to tackle the problem that they're going after with momentum. And they must provide a platform for different disciplines to work together across one institution, but also between institutions and organisations and across continents and across technologies. And I think most important of all, because I am leading this initiative in a university that has some very impatient characters within it, whether it be my chief financial officer or my vice chancellor, for example, who want to see results now, when actually these journeys are going to be, 10 or more years in the pursuing. They're not going to be fulfilled overnight, and we're only 2.5 years into that journey right now. So they need to be given time, their impact and value, and even where those may fail will only be known actually in time. But I think we can see already observable outcomes from the programme. They've certainly encouraged ambition. They've enabled the university to act in a strategic way, in a much more concerted way than probably we ever had before. They offer a very powerful signal to external parties and funding agencies who are now beginning to look to what can they bring to the party in relation to what we're doing. It helps us navigate complex structures within the university and bring disparate bits of it together. And it helps to connect, actually, really quite fundamental research to very applied activities behind a common goal and attracts talent and funding. And I think, hopefully, a more efficient model of research, actually, if we're sort of coalescing facilities, for example. And so far, a very substantial leveraging effect. We're observing a 3-to-1 so far in 2.5 years of external funding coming in against the money the university has put in. And we hope also for this to have wider benefits for students, for the curriculum, for student attraction to the university. Again, we're seeing the power of these beacons with the sustainability agenda behind them being something that students want to come to our university to be part of and study with and see it as part of the university's raison d'etre. Finally then, just what is it about creating a sustainable entity? We need to start thinking about that. We're beginning to think about what are the structures by which we will embed these into the university for the long term. They're each going to be owned by a faculty, although they will be a separate cost centre. The goal is for them to be self-sustaining at 5 years. They won't be given any more university money. And they need to then evolve and be able to achieve their mission, which is going to require them to secure substantial external funding. But it does require university support, whether it's infrastructure, whether it's support from the HR department, the communications and marketing, and so forth, in order for them to do the work that they do and fulfill their plans. And I think they are largely on a trajectory to become really critical platforms for a breakthrough science and innovation. And we're beginning to sort of see what these might evolve into. Each probably rather different. So Rights Lab may become something more like a policy institute. The Future Food System is thinking about a future food systems institute. And Propulsion Futures is likely to be a large end-to-end research group, which is embedded in this very large industry ecosystem, as I was describing earlier. So it's been a great journey so far, and I look forward to perhaps coming back and saying, where do we get to in another 2.5 years' time? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Let's see what questions we've got so far. This appears to be a top-down initiative, but what is the role of the bottom-up ideas?
So that's very interesting. It's a combination of top-down and bottom-up. So the top-down part of the initiative was the university saying, well, let's set out to do this. But in fact, the areas of research did come up from the bottom. And in fact, the directors of the beacons go out and work with academics across the university to find projects and support initiatives to come forward. So although the mission kind of seems like it's top down, it has emerged out of the university's strengths and community. It's an interesting, again, iteration between those two things, I think.
Thank you. Do you have any suggestion on how to promote internal collaboration before competition?
If I knew the answer to that, I'd be
Silver bullet.
Yes. But I think both of those things are healthy. They certainly have helped to bring people together and foster collaboration that might not have happened otherwise. And the leadership has been critical in the way those individuals have gone out and found people. It's been very helpful to have some pump priming funding to allow people to work together in a way they might not have done before. Having said that, we have discovered there's something called beacon envy.
Oh dear.
The parts of the university that feel they're not part of one of these. Which is part of the competition element that has a more negative side, I guess.
And how do you deal with the beacon envy?
Trying to allow as many people as possible to get involved. I think it's about making sure that it isn't the only thing that we're doing in the university for research. There are many other initiatives, many other groupings, many other activities that won't necessarily fit into this, and it's important to value those as much as the fact that we've got a sort of flagship program going on in the university. But it is a tension.
Of course. How important was central university leadership in establishing successful beacons as opposed to leadership by relatively independent faculties?
I think the drive to establish the programme is a university leadership agenda, but we work very much in partnership. So our faculties have pro-vice chancellors who are my partners in the exercise, actually. So I think in collaboration, and we collectively agreed what the programme should look like. But it's a combination of both.
Let's take one final question. Do the centres plan for sustainability after the funding period from the beginning of the programme or from the beginning of the programme?
Ideally, I think you'd be planning from the very beginning because sustainability takes a long time. So some examples of the way we thought about that was all of the academic appointments in a beacon have a home in a school in part of the university, and they're embedded in the establishment of the academic community in that school. So they don't belong as such to the beacon. they have a homeschool and they work within the beacons. So that is a model for sort of securing a future proof to whatever might happen, and also feeling that these people are owned by a particular disciplinary group. So there are elements like that can help build for sustainability. Being very clear about the expectations that the funding is for 5 years. It's not to support things in perpetuity. But now we're having to do more work saying, well, there are core costs to these beacons. How are you going to make them sustainable? What are your plans for developing that? Finding external funding to cover off technicians or other elements that you would really miss if you didn't have them. Again, it's a journey to make sure that we can do that.
Well, thank you very much. I have a little gift for you here in the corner. Here you go.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And the smell of lovely coffee might not have reached you from that bag, but it sure smells good. And luckily enough, we have a coffee break now in the foyer. Let's meet back again at 3:15. And don't forget to look at the poster display in the foyer. See you in a bit. Please take your seats. We have one more speaker before the panel discussion, and as we stated before, please send your questions into the next speaker. And the questions that we are not be able to accommodate, we might be able to recycle for the panel. However, the next speaker will not be able to attend the panel, so we'll stretch that section of time for your questions a bit longer this time. So, do we have everybody in place? Great. The Association of Universities in the Netherlands has done an exciting work with the SDGs, of mapping the SDGs in relation to the academic world. We will now be listening to the director, Babs van den Berg, who comes from the Association of Universities in the Netherlands, VSNU. She will talk about how the Dutch universities contribute to societal changes, which is very much what we've addressed today, of course. Babs van den Berg has worked for the government in The Hague at the Ministry of Culture, Education and Science. Please give her a warm hand.
Thank you very much. To the question that was asked to me, how do the universities in the Netherlands address the SDGs with their excellent research? I thought I should give a subtle answer. It's not a one-way fix or instrument that we have applied. I'm talking from a national perspective, representing the 9 comprehensive research-intensive Dutch universities with 300,000 students in total, and the 4 technical universities and the 1 long-distance university, open university, although there is no long distance in the Netherlands. It is called the Open University, but it is meant to educate adults. Not really to boast, but to just to say that we indeed are doing excellent research. We are pushing above our weight. We are the orange dot. The Swedish ones are the blue ones, so you are not doing so bad either, but you are doing it with a lot more money. So this is a slide. Maybe your politicians will be envious about, but you shouldn't be. And we are doing well in terms of the old-fashioned research quality criteria, like the citations and age indices. And we can conclude we are doing things well, but are we doing the right things? And that was a question that we addressed some 10 years ago already. And that had to do with a few things that we concluded. Academia is not very lovable, not very well loved by politicians. The gap between the public and academia is widening. Students demand engagement more of the universities, staff as well. And I think the climate discussion pulled it off also. And that had also to do with part of our excellence programs that we had at the time were funded out of our natural gas resources. And they stopped. And also the funding stopped. And what happened then, that's maybe an answer to what to do after the funding stops for this research excellence centers here in Lund. What happened, part of it is that the academics, the researchers, they just find their way in other institutions, but there also was a bit of a brain drain to other countries. So that's what we thought. So we, I think the whole system, the universities, but also especially the Royal Academy in the Netherlands, thought we should think about how to go further. And how we did it is, I think, we have used 4 ways to move to do more of the good things. And it started with know thyself, and then we did some other things. Know thyself. The Netherlands is mostly a polder, or large parts of the Netherlands are a polder. We are below sea level. I think you know maybe the story, but we have been in the last couple of 100 years very good in water management. And that means that we made land out of water. You can see it here in this old painting, also from the 1600s. What poldering means also is that you have to cooperate with your neighbors. And it has had a very democratic part of it as well. The oldest democratic institutions in the Netherlands are the so-called waterschappen, so the water managers of that time. I think it helps us even now that we come from this tradition. What you see here also is a lot of agricultural activities, transportation, and some industry. And what you see is windmills. That is not only a sign of water management and polders, but also of this agriculture. And you see a lot of different kinds of types of churches. And that means that we were an open and tolerant society to different types of, at least, Christianity. And this means that we are good at water management, agriculture, food, but also in publishing industry. Maybe Elsevier is not a very, something to be proud of, but it is Dutch originally. And it says something, I think, about our struggle now in open access. And we are good in international law. So a lot of criminal courts in the Netherlands are based in the Netherlands, and you can see that later on that this is also one of the themes and also the societal development goals on which we are working a lot. I couldn't find out why we are good also in medicine, but maybe that has to do also with a kind of rational attitude and also with the cooperation that is needed to do that. I would say that if you want to address the societal development goals, do not try to address them all, but please stick to where you are good at. That's for if you start something new. What we wanted to do after this funding from these gas resources dried out, we wanted to make an offer to our government, a new government, and we developed together with the Royal Academy the National Science Agenda. And we did that together with 11,000 citizens from the Netherlands. We said, what question do you want to have answered, to be answered by us? It took months of first setting out this question and then especially clustering them. A lot of people were involved. And we derived some 25 topics out of it. And we said to our government, please, this is what we think that should be researched by us, but we can do a lot by ourselves, but we need extra money to do it. After a few years, the next government decided to put 400 million euros to it, but they gave it to the Funding Council, and they attached a lot of strings to it and a lot of extra things that you had to do for it, and a very competitive scheme for consortia on a few of these 25 topics only last year was set out. So it was a huge effort for a lot of scientists, and the results were after 2 years of polling, which is now having a lot of discussions and debate and those strings attached, we had this first call in 2018. It was a very complex scheme, and only 6% of the proposals that were sent in could be funded. So a lot of the funding council was overloaded. The academics were disappointed, are disappointed. But we had also more focus on societal topics. And you see here again that it is on water, it's on agriculture, it's on health. We had a lot of meetings, negotiations, bargaining. So we are maybe have become a victim of our success. Was the science agenda a good idea? We are now asking ourselves. The aims were the public problems in the spotlight, long-termism in science politics. That's something we really hoped for, and we got a bit of that because the programs of the Funding Council have been extended from 4 to 5 years to 7 to 8 years. We wanted to close the gap of the public and the academia, but our new populist on the block that is lying here down on his piano, his first address was universities are a threat to our identity. So no, the gap, it's more widening, I'm afraid, than closing. But also a lot of new research programs or consortia and cooperations, and also a few courses or new curricula on the SDGs. This was our first thing that we did. And actually at the moment, our Ministry of Finance thinks, because of the financial situation in the world, that he can make a fund again, maybe more alike this gas resources fund. I'm not sure, because of the coronavirus and what that is doing to this financial situation at the moment, whether it will stay an idea and it will be in his mind until September when he has to decide. But we are at the moment making proposals again, and now it is on the themes that are government. So that's more the Swedish example at the moment. But we try not to stir too much people up, otherwise everybody is writing proposals and not doing other things and getting disappointed maybe in the end. So we want to be sure more about before we are really going to work on that. Another thing that we are doing at the moment, and I think that might be something that is on a more fundamental basis will work, is that we try to align our reward and recognition systems for our academics, so that we reward cooperation more, impact, citizen science, open science and interdisciplinarity, so that we can enhance SDG-related research. We do this not only for this reason, but also for instance, for teaching excellence. That's one of the reasons that we have to focus more on our teaching, but also to enhance the leadership. And maybe also the workload reduction and the stress in the academic culture at the moment. So the basic idea is that not every researcher has to do all the good things in the research and having the high indicators and having good educational evaluations and being a leader and etc. But that you in a team you can maybe divide those traits a bit better and cooperate. To do that, we have to revision our standardized research evaluation protocol. That has already been done at the moment, so in a few months it will be ready. Every university has to implement a new reward system and promotion criteria to alter them, and the Funding Council will revise its criteria a bit. And this we hope, because it's going on at the moment, that we are not alone in this, that also other European countries at least will follow us, or not follow us, but do things that are kind of the same things, because it will be very hard to turn things around if you are so internationally connected. But I do think that it will help if you want to focus more on the SDGs. And what we also did is try to know ourselves better, to make a kind of feedback system, because we think it helps if it gets feedback at the things that you want done. So the Vrije Universiteit, one of our universities, already did this kind of analysis of all our publications, of all their publications, together in its European network. So how many of them were related to the societal development goals? And we asked them, and we commissioned this research to do this for all the Dutch universities. And what's nice to see back that is our strengths. Climate action, that's most of it is water management kind of things. We already saw that, for instance, during Katrina, that our Dutch scientists were asked to help there. Peace, justice and strong institutions, and zero hunger, food, agriculture. So those are the main things, the themes that we are doing it. But then we also try to figure out how did these publications influence policy documents? And that is what you can see here. And there you, for instance, can see that number 16, that's those policy and justice and peace theme, is not very well taken up by policies. So this, but and things where you would think that we are not quite well represented in the societal development goals. Number 3 is in health. You see that they are much more used than the other disciplines to have their research taken up into policies. Comparatively, we do not produce so much papers on health or poverty, but the ones we write are taken up quite well. And clean energy is also an example where this is doing quite well. The other aspect of which we thought maybe that is something that helps this take-up is the open access part of our publications. So we also try to find out what is the percentage of these publications that are published in open access. And here you also can see that it helps. And the blue dot left below is again this justice and peace theme in which we are strong, but we don't reach the goal of really getting it taken up. So this research or this paper on which we commissioned, we discussed it within our association, and we hope that it will give a feedback loop to every university to do more on either focusing their research or making it more, having more impact. Do things that it would have more impact. In conclusion, I would say, I don't know, I'm quite fast, I hear. Build on your strengths. Remember the Nobel Prize criteria, I would say to Sweden. Well, I was very much impressed the one time I attended this ceremony by the stress or the focus on the applicability of the research and the societal relevance that was taken up there. I even had a fight with our Minister of Innovation about it at the time. His quote was, "This government is not funding to get Nobel Prizes." And I called him stupid. But I would say that is something that you could really work on and build upon. I would also stress that it is important to connect it to your courses or your curricula, to your education. Students want it. This is your other example here from Scandinavia. Staff wants it. Engagement is important. And within those courses, maybe you also should try to develop and teach cooperation or interdisciplinary skills more than we are used to. At least that is something that what we are thinking about doing. It's something also for the 21st century. And the last, maybe, although it didn't work quite well, or we didn't reach this aim of closing the gap, try to engage with your citizens, with society as much as possible. Because one of the things that was also surprising us, that it was not only the concerns of health or economic. There were also really quite philosophical questions in this science agenda group of 11,000 questions. And so the end of the universe, or why is art important, or what is it about art that is beautiful? And those questions, they have also, well, a value, and it's something you can do in your university. So those, I think, are the messages that I wanted to give today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let's see what questions we have coming up. And meanwhile, here we go. How was the discussion between academia and government catalyzed?
About this science agenda, that was actually the Royal Academy of Science took a large part of it, the leading position in this. And they invited as well government officials. I was one at the time, as academia, as also companies. So I remember a few weekends in a conference center where all kind of parties were together.
And it worked the way you put it together, you think?
Well, it worked in a way until it was taken by this government and given to the funding council with too much strings attached. So they have taken out a part of it. They have said they have put too much other criteria to it for what we wanted to be.
Could that have been avoided?
Could have been, of course.
I mean, but in more and how?
And how? It's politics. It's difficult to avoid it because at that moment it became too much something of this new government who wanted to press too much certain aspects of this agenda and others not. So this public has to vote differently, and that's difficult to change.
Mm-hmm. How did you classify all publications in terms of the SDGs? Seem to be a huge effort.
Yes, it's a huge effort, but it's data mining experts, wizards from the Vrije Universiteit in Amsterdam who did it for us. So they have maybe that's also one of the things having Elsevier around the corner. That you have, we have a lot of data and metadata of all our scientific publications. So actually it wasn't so much huge an effort once they had done it before.
What would you say has been the most important effect from your SDG mapping?
Well, maybe it's for us as an association of the universities to present to at least our government, but also other parties, that actually, yes, we are doing a lot about the SDGs. So it's maybe even more in a reputational public affairs kind of effect, more than back towards the university. But maybe it's not too soon to tell.
Could that have effects further on? I mean, the highlighting of your work in terms of politics. And how?
It's this question.
No, this is just my follow-up question. How could be? I mean, when you highlight the work and that sort of the light is shown on it, what further effects could that be further down the stream?
Well, what we are hoping for is that they trust us more. But maybe the effect is that they recognize parts of the excellent, or they have respect for huge chunks of excellent work. So if it's big and has critical mass, then maybe they invest in this. So the three top might be might be stimulated by the government.
Let's take another Menti question. How do Dutch researchers ensure that policymakers read their work?
That's also what I would call, part of it is poldering. So knowing them and going to them, engage in meetings or conferences. I think it's the Netherlands is a small country. I think Sweden is also not that big. That once you are an expert in a field, you know the public civil servant that is also working in that field. You know a director, etc. So it takes a lot of social skills as well, and reaching out and convincing. Stamina. Stamina helps a lot. You need it actually. Yeah.
Is citizen science really worth the trouble?
Well, sometimes really it does. I know quite also really fun examples from astronomy, for instance. We have this school teacher, Honey, who was a fan of Queen, and you know there's a guitarist of
Queen as in the band.
The band Queen, not our Queen, but Queen as in the band, who has a guitarist who is an astronomer. And he said, please look at these images of the universe. There are millions of these images, and you have to tell me what you see, categorize what you see. And she actually discovered something unseen, and it's now called Honey's voorwerp, Honey's object. And it's a Dutch school teacher, actually. So, yes, you can. And in the slipstream, you engage citizens in your research, and I think it's nice. And I think in medicine, you really should do it to involve patients. It also depends on the field and the discipline that you are in. But yes. Yes, it's worth it. It took me some time to think about it, but yes, you should do it if you can.
Here's a big one. Academic freedom, ?
Academic freedom. Yes, it's under stress. No, it is problematic. I think, and it has to do with the amount of the block grant that was talked about. with the lump sum that universities get. Part of our problem in the Netherlands, and also being successful within the EU horizon, but also within our funding, which both they require a lot of matching from the universities. So you get €1, but you have to put in €1.
That's time
also.
consuming.
Hmm?
That's time consuming. Finding
It's time consuming, but it's also consuming the space, the room you have for your own ideas and your own policies within the university. So that really, and so it is, and by that academic freedom. There really has to be a big part, and it's in the Netherlands at the moment it's really diminishing quite rapidly. But it has to do with our kind of funding scheme. I think the situation is better here. I showed already in my first slide, but yeah.
Why is academia seen as a threat by the government? With the piano man.
The piano man.
I was wondering, what is the guy with the piano in this? Why is he in the picture? But that got
it's a populist, the new populist. He has a PhD in philosophy from Leiden University. It's the most academic kind of person you could think of. But I think that he said it. He really is very right wing. So the openness of academia to other cultures, to the international dimension. That's why universities are a threat to our identity.
So one type of university is okay, but the more multicultural, open is not okay. Is that the synthesis of it?
We are all multicultural and open. Yeah.
So that is a problem.
That's a problem. Yeah, in his mind, yes.
How to teach interdisciplinarity?
Yes. That's also bringing people together and teach how to talk with each other, how to understand. So you have to teach a discipline, but also minors have to maybe be addressed, problem-based teaching, for instance, or and setting a good example. So,
do you have any specific good examples of
yes, we have Maastricht University, who is the one only who really has this problem-based teaching scheme for 20 or 30 years already. And so, and once you have a big problem, you need more disciplines to address them.
Of course, it's the complexity of it all.
Yeah.
Let's see. I have one final question here for you, but then you need to hop on your train. How do we ensure the renewal of centers of excellence and avoid cementing research environments?
Yes. Well, we are hoping for cement, actually. More cement and less short-term grants. But of course, you need renewal. What I told about this program that stopped, what happened then is also part of it is that renewal happens because people find their ways. Academics find their ways into other groups or institutions. But you want maybe a bit more guided renewal. And I was triggered by this Finnish example of being used to growth. So you can always add something new to what you are doing. But I think we have reached already for a few years now, 10 years or something, this plateau. So we are still struggling with that. We are also maybe hoping for a demographic effect that we had, of course, a big growth in the 70s, as I presume you did as well. So some part of this problem will solve itself because people are going into retirement at the coming years. and otherwise putting more focus on the things that you are good at already and strengthening those pockets and try to find other places for people that are not in those fields.
Speaking of renewal, how are you addressing what is the quota, more or less, in the Netherlands when it comes to gender equality in the university, the world of the universities? That's one of the important global goals too, huh?
It is, and we are not good at it. We are really. A few years ago, we were below Zimbabwe or something.
Oh dear.
With female professors, it really. But we have done a lot in the last 10 years. One university is only appointing female professors at the moment for the next 2 years. So it is a problem, and we will if we go on in this on this great rate, we will have reached the balance in 2050 or something. So it's not good enough.
There's need for speed.
There's need for speed, yes.
And now you have need for speed too to catch your train.
Thank you.
I'll get you some goodies to enjoy on the trip, maybe.
Thank you very much.
Let's send you off with a warm round of applause.
Yeah, thank you.
I will now be welcoming the panel up, and I'd also like to welcome you to stand up for just a few minutes. Don't leave the room if you don't absolutely have to, but just stretch your legs and stretch your arms, or roll your shoulders, whatnot, so you get some oxygen into the body, so we can listen to the panelists with full focus. Sitting is the new smoking, as we know, so we need to move our bodies. All right. Even a minute or two helps. Let's now welcome back on stage Professor Heikki Manila and Professor Dame Jessica Corner. And also we'd like to welcome Henrik Smith, who is Professor of Animal Ecology and Coordinator of the Strategic Research Area BECC, Biodiversity and Ecosystems Services. There you are, I was looking for you, Henrik, in a changing climate. Please join your colleagues over here. And Henrik, you are here because you are chairperson of the SFO Collegiate, and also so hereby you're representing the SFOs from the University of Lund.
As good as I can.
Excellent. And you'll have head mics, wonderful. And now we have a pretty mixed assortment of questions from Menti, Tina, right? So they're going to pop up here, but I'm going to warm you up a bit before that. Would you like to reflect? I'm going to turn to you, Henrik, because you have not been speaking before, on the previous presentations. Now, Babs van den Berg had to leave, but you could comment or just reflect on her presentation anyway, or the one for Professor Manila or Professor Dame Corner.
A basic reflection is that there are many terms and many ways that we actually work with these problems, how to actually focus on the grand challenges. And we have heard terms like competence centers, centers of excellence. It's actually quite hard only from the term to know what we are talking about, but I was pleased to see so many interesting and successful examples that we actually can build upon. However, the comment that pleased me most was actually from Stacy here, from the question whether the SFOs will exist 2030.
That was a quick answer.
Who stated without hesitation, yes. And I think this is important because whatever approach we take, this is a long-term endeavor. We are creating trust with stakeholders. It takes an incredibly long time to do that. We are changing attitudes with our researchers, which takes time. So, Naomi, I worked with 10 years with Beck, and it's slow, but it's coming. And we work with recruitment, and without long-term commitment, there's no way we can persuade a line organization to engage in recruitment. So thank you for that, Stacey.
Thank you. Professor Manila, would you like to comment on the other speakers' presentations? Reflections.
It's been very interesting to hear the different ways and like as Henrik said, the different very interesting ways in which the same idea that, okay, what should the administrations and the funders do to improve the scale and perhaps also quality of research on sustainability. And it's really the idea that, okay, there is not a single magic silver bullet that would solve all the problems, but it's more like kind of figuring out what are the necessary things to provide at the same time the needed small push, at the same time keeping a lot an eye on the academic freedom and remembering the kind of conflicting claims of thinking long term and wanting to get something done fairly quickly.
Thank you. Professor Dame Corner?
Yeah, I think what's been good for me is to listen to the extent to which we're all collectively in different countries and with different funding mechanisms and different ways actually trying to address these massive common societal problems. And it's not, universities have always been here to do those kinds of work, but there's a sense of a kind of collective endeavour, I think, around doing that and doing it in a way that helps society understand the value and purpose of universities all over again. And I think we've heard in different ways about that being necessary. I mean, Babs just showing her politician on the piano is just a sort of manifestation of that, isn't it? But if we don't try and do that, not only have we got to sort of tackle these major problems, and we've got a lot of resources, intellectual and others, to put to them, but if we don't, that we kind of, I think that universities could have been perceived to have been lost their way. So we're at this sort of critical juncture where we've got to still be purposeful and useful, but there are these massive challenges to address. So being too purist about our purpose would not serve that well.
What would you say is or are the main challenges in fostering the centres of excellence right now and also in the nearby future?
Well, I think that longevity and patience is a huge challenge. I mean, mobilising ourselves to organise groups of academics and resources, change directions, pull things from one thing to another is very challenging in itself. But if you're going to do that, you don't want to do it for the short term. You've got to then let the fruits of that come to bear on these massive challenges, and that's not a quick overnight job. So I think patience, and that's at every level. That's at peer-to-peer level, it's at institutional level, and it's at government and funding body level. Needs to be patient for this, I think.
Do you agree? Is it patience or anything else? We talked about stamina before. That's basically the same thing.
Yeah, patience is, of course, needed. One thing which actually came up in discussion during the break is sort of the question of renewal in certain cases. It can be either too quick or too slow. But really the question of renewal, that we know that science renews itself all the time, and especially for these areas, it might be that the needed speed for renewal, which actually starts sounding like silly, that okay, needed speed for renewal. We wanted to have the patience, but at the same time we want to kind of be looking at how the scenery is changing. It's actually now changing very concretely. We didn't have any snow in Helsinki this winter.
Not here either.
Yeah, but it's patience and change combined. I think that's one of the challenges.
Thank you. Henrik Smith?
I would like to make two comments here. The first is that the question of renewal often comes up in discussions about centers of excellence, but it should be equally relevant when it comes to discussing a traditional department or faculty. And if we look at it, actually the centers of excellence, for example, the Swedish SRAs, they are an instrument for renewal. So the whole idea from the government and the way we have worked has been to actually enforce renewal in a quite traditional university. And I can't see why this discussion is sort of more applicable to the SRAs than to the rest of the university. We need a lot of incitament for renewal all over the board, including the centers of excellence.
You're nodding? You're agreeing?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, universities have the, a great strength of having been around for centuries and their subjects and their disciplines. But at the same time, they have to evolve and change, and that can be hard, can't it? So you're right. It is interesting to observe that they're instruments for renewal, and we should use those disciplines more actively, probably.
I'd like to make one more comment here about the challenges. I think an underestimated challenge is actually organizational, because we're working in traditional universities which has faculties and departments and other structures that makes all the decision. And now we are creating bridging organizations and try to create a matrix organization. And in a sort of traditional university like Lund University, it takes time to find the instruments whereby these centers of excellence actually can influence the long-term processes. It's quite easy if you have flexible money to do short things. You can employ people working with outreach, communication, have pilot projects and so on. But as you stressed, we want to also affect recruitments. And we would like to affect infrastructure investments and finding the sort of proper way to combine a traditional line organization with this is a bridging organization in a matrix is quite difficult. And I think that's a large challenge. And I don't know if that's a perfect solution. We need to find ways built on trust between leaderships.
Thank you. Let's take some Menti questions. And either one of you can answer this one, or any of them actually, because they're not addressed to any specific speaker. Is there an optimal balance between top-down and bottom-up initiatives for solving the SDGs? Go ahead.
I would offer balance. You need both. It's not one or the other. One fuels the other, but you need innovation, creativity, ideas that haven't been thought of by anybody. You need a space for them to come forward, but you also need instruments to foster the possibility of that. So for me, it's both probably in balance.
Objectives? Objections, I mean.
You can't do good science without having a bottom-up approach within your way of doing science at the university. So that's always required. The question is what frames we set for that. And even when we do sort of traditional decision-making, we make top-down decisions. When we decide about traditional recruitments, we recruit some specific professor, or we put money in some specific department. Now we put money in a specific area. But within that frame, I think it's really important to take care of bottom-up initiatives.
When we look at the students that are coming in now, we look at the younger students, if you look at research about their value-based thinking and how they want to address, put their ethics into the workforce, how do you think this will change this balance between the bottom-up and the top-down? Because many of the young students are activists or engaged in the topics that are really addressed in the SDGs. Is this an asset, or could this be a problem?
I mean, I can say from Nottingham's point of view, it's an asset for student recruitment, that we know that our Beacons programme and the way we've been portrayed, into the public domain has had a very positive benefit on attracting students to apply to the university. So, they want to be part of these things. So, students are pretty concerned about their futures and what's happening to the planet and so far. Absolutely. So, if we're not doing some of these activities, then we might find our institutions are not so attractive to students. So, that's not necessarily the first reason for doing it, but actually it is part of the story, and they want to participate. They want activities to be part of and curriculum that are informed from these perspectives. So, I think it's a positive business decision in all sorts of ways, as well as a moral one.
Well, we've seen of many institutions starting in Paris that the students will not commit to working in companies that are not aligning their work with the Paris Agreement. So, Henrik, did you want to add, or Professor Mandela first?
Yeah, certainly. I think that it's an asset when the students are kind of interested and enthusiastic about the themes. But actually, this relates to, Henrik was pointing out that the organization might be a problem, and I completely agree. But there also kind of the educational organization is a problem. Many of us, I'm certain in this room, know that it's quite hard to organize the education when people have different backgrounds. I have a lot of experience in kind of bioinformatics education, which in hindsight was pretty easy. There were biologists and computer scientists, which wasn't that far away. But this problem that when you look at some of the SDG-related research and the idea that the university should also be educating students in this thing, there is this that multidisciplinarity needs discipline. You need to have the disciplinary excellence also, but then you need to be able to understand what the others are doing and speak the common language and all this, which we know. And in education, this is actually, it's pretty difficult. There's always the problem of losing 3/4 of the audience in the first 15 minutes by just choosing the unknown terminology.
Let's take another question. Do you have special programs for the leaders? I assume that would be the leaders for the centers of excellence. Henrik, do you have special education programs, or I know you have a group that you're obviously the head of.
Initially, Lund University had a very strong program for the leaders of the SRAs, and now they are providing us with more general courses, which the new leaders of the program can participate in. So yes, we have that, but we also have to care quite a lot for the sort of development of a new leadership ourselves, because many of the things that are important are not taught directly in courses. I think it's an important part of the general process to foster a new leadership for the centers of excellence.
Such as
giving trust to younger leaders, such to work with the working conditions of coming leaders so that they actually can take common responsibilities, such to help to identify good programs that are not necessarily given by Lund University that can contribute to leadership skills.
Thank you.
We don't have any, at the funding agency, we don't have any specific programs for the leaders. What we do is that we kind of organize meetings for them to kind of exchange experiences in the problem and in providing them certain peer help in solving some of the problems, but nothing specific.
How about at your university?
Yeah, at Nottingham we have, there's a leadership academy for the university, but we also have a senior research leaders development program, which offers the opportunity for, it's sort of for the newly promoted professor level. And they spend time together. They also have time where they all go and work abroad on a project to one of our campuses. We've got a campus in China and a campus in Malaysia, so they go to one of those, do joint projects. They also have the opportunity to shadow senior members of the university, could be myself, could be the Vice-Chancellor or whatever, to come and experience strategic leadership. And that's been a great source of people to find to who may be wanting to lead projects. Our Centre of Excellence Beacons directors had the opportunity to go on a very senior leadership programme. It wasn't designed for them, tailored for them. It was for them to be among senior people and take on some of the aspects of leadership through that, as well as coaching and mentoring opportunities. And then we convene them, like you say, to talk to each other about their experience. And there's more to do on that, actually, as we learn more about this whole area.
More collaboration.
The more they can share with each other and learn from each other, and we learn from their experiences, the better, I think. So it's not like a designed program, but more this coming together to talk about it and learn from it, I think is very valuable.
Thank you. Why does it take so much time to create trust with stakeholders? Big questions.
Should I give it a try?
Yes, please, Henrik, do.
I think we often don't appreciate that stakeholders have as specialized roles as we have, and they are as stressed as we are as scientists. And we think that they would be happy just to read and be enlightened by what we are doing. So what I think takes time is for stakeholders to learn about realities of doing science, and for the scientists of actually learning about the realities of being out there working with the policy problems. And I think in the beginning, when we had the Beck environment, many Beck researchers knew very little about the policy environment, and it was quite embarrassing to be out there sort of discussing very banal things. So we need to realize that we as scientists, we need to learn quite a lot about the policy world to be able to talk with those who actually make decisions. And it takes a long time to create a culture where this is regarded as something important to do as a scientist.
Do you have any good examples on how this has been done from your perspective?
We have had deliberate educations, conferences and courses related to connecting research to policy. You can take one example, that is the Common Agricultural Policy, which is one of the largest investments in the environment in Europe, which is a terribly complicated policy where most people just think it's a general subsidy to farmers. But it's actually a very complex policy driven by complex agendas by the different member countries. And it takes years to get people working with biodiversity or with carbon accumulation in soils in agriculture to realize that, and then to be able to talk to those who actually can influence the future policies. So we cannot only blame the stakeholders. We have to look at ourselves and how we present our science and how we understand the reality of the context that decisions are made.
Any comments?
Yeah, I mean, I would say a large part of my job is about fostering very good relationships with all sorts of external and other parties where you're trying to work with, whether it's industry leaders or whether it's funding bodies or whether it's government agencies or whatever. And it's absolutely essential that you have that shared understanding, and fostering very good relationships is absolutely fundamental to doing it, to working effectively. We've set up an Institute for Policy Engagement actually for the university in order to enable exactly what you're talking about, to have a vehicle by which the skills of networking, collaborating, talking to policymakers, bringing them in, seeing what you're doing, engaging with the public as well. You've got an expert. We've appointed a director who was a very senior civil servant in government to come and lead that with us, and of course has those relationships and knows how to operate in that kind of environment. Enormously useful to academics who, that hasn't necessarily been the path they've taken. So that's proved very helpful.
Thank you. How does recruitment of professors come into the centers? As I said, it's a big mix of questions here, but fire away. Who would like to address that one? You spoke about the cost of recruitment,
or the commitment that the university makes. Of course, all universities make their recruitment decisions using their own procedures, and it might be connected to the centers of excellence, or as was referred to earlier, it might be that the recruitment is made on the basis of some disciplinary classification, that there is a department of physics and a department of sociology and so on. But of course, one way of looking at this sort of, or SDGs or something that the university views as important, it might be that, okay, it commits its resources by recruiting professors from that area, but they need not come into the Center for Excellence. They can come to the department but this is all kind of very dependent on how the university wants to organize its activities. So some UK universities, I think was it Manchester, they had the idea that, okay, education was organized this way and all research was kind of in some sort of other stuff, or more like this sort of center of excellence type or platform type of. But I don't remember where they actually recruited the professors. Was it to the education or to the research lines?
Or
probably both.
probably, yeah.
So there is a lot of variation here, and it's difficult to say that, okay, this is the way to do it.
Of course. Henrik, tell us about how you do it here.
I wish there was just a single picture of Lund University, but even in Lund it's complex. But generally, it's the line organization, that is the departments or sometimes the faculties that actually make the decisions about professor recruitments. But the strategic research environment can then influence those more or less formally by having discussions with the faculty leadership, with the departmental leadership. And this is at the moment quite informal. And my wish as a leader of strategic research areas is that this would be more formalized, so that the uptake of the views of the excellence centers would be more systematic. Because if we really want a renewal here, we actually need to influence the long-term recruitments. And the SRI at the moment work with different ways to sort of stimulate this. For example, we can contribute some of the funding for a coming professor. But that also requires that we have sort of long-term guarantees for the funding. Otherwise, our guarantees are not worth that much.
Of course. What kind of dialogue does the Finnish Academy have with universities connected to these initiatives?
We have a lot of dialogue. So we talk regularly with the university, with their rectors, and it's really the mode of operation is that, okay, we have an idea that, okay, this sort of funding might be useful. I go to the Rectors Association and tell them of this idea. They say that, well, they've heard worse ideas, but not recently. And then I kind of change my proposal a little bit. There is a very kind of a lot of dialogue there. That it's not that the funding agency would know exactly what fits with the universities, and at least I've found it very useful and lots of fun to talk with the universities. We also talk with the unions of university professors, with the unions of university researchers. It's also extremely useful, because then they have a different view on the universities than the rectors have, and a different view than what we have in the academy. So we talk a lot. We just kind of changed this profiling instrument a little bit, and for a presentation for fun, I collected all the meetings we had with universities, and it was several slides. Really kind of working out that, okay, because then the universities have to write the applications. So it's for the benefit of them and for us is that if the rules, regulations, instructions are as clear as possible, and they lead to the common goal of improving the quality, impact, and renewal of the science.
Dialogue with unions, is this something you recognize?
A bit, but more to do probably with the predicament of early career researchers who, as you know, well, I imagine it's similar here, but in the UK can have quite precarious careers, short-term contracts and serial short-term contracts, and then not necessarily having their careers shaped and developed in a way. And the unions are very, very preoccupied by that, and talk to us a lot. So we're trying to work on better policies. Actually, it's better grant managers, the PR, we call them principal investigators, cannot adhere to university policies, actually, in terms of looking after their staff who are on short-term contracts. And actually, the funding models are not helpful for developing careers, really, because it encourages this short-term, repeated short-term contracts for individuals. So, yes, that's where we have interaction with the unions. We have got industrial action in the UK among our university academics, which is about pensions and working conditions, and they are striking at the moment.
They are. Okay. Yeah. Are conflicts between goals a driving force for development? We do have a lot of goal conflicts. We have identified several during the day already.
I don't know whether I understand the question. Yeah.
We can rephrase the question a bit. Say that.
Or conflict between goals. I think it's goal conflicts between the SDGs.
The conflicts between the Sustainable Development Goals are one of the things that are really constraining the development, and therefore they are really important and interesting as research problems. Personally, I work with biodiversity issues, and see Erik Svetlicki here. We're always discussing whether green energy, that is bioenergy, is a threat or a promise for the future. This is a very interesting goal to see if research can alleviate this nearly impossible conflict by finding new solutions. So I think by the importance, they become really exciting scientific problems.
And hence the driving force.
It's a driving force internally for us then to work with problems where we actually can make a real contribution.
And I guess revealing those conflicts through what you're saying is very helpful.
Yeah.
Because that's not well understood by the public, I would say.
No.
Or governments, probably.
Probably both. Would you like to add? No? Good. Any arguments for not investing in centers? It's okay.
I've heard them.
Yes, you can cite somebody else.
I've heard from purist disciplines would like to have resources flowing to them so they can get on unencumbered by any other influences, and there's an argument for that actually. So there's a place for both.
Henrik?
I would like to link to something Stacey said, that actually the amount of money going to the centers is quite limited. There are mainly structural money for achieving change. The basic funding for the salaries for professors and PhD students and so on are often coming from other sources. So it's not that we are draining the rest of the university by having the centers, which is an image you can have if you have a naive view of what the centers actually are. And of course, my answer to the question is no.
Well, and on that point, the alternative is that extra resource just wouldn't be there. It's not as if it's necessarily going to everything else. It might just not be there at all. And is that what you want? Is that a better answer? Probably not. Please.
Yeah. I agree with the other panelists on here that it often seems to be the case when talking about research funding that specific initiatives, they are viewed to be much larger than they actually are. I once asked some researchers that how much they think that the Academy of Finland has thematic funding on our kind of basic funding. The true answer was something like at that time was about 30 million euros per year. And the suggested answers were about 3 times as much.
Oh dear.
So it's tends to be a lot more visible, the sort of the centers of excellence or whatever. And just as Henrik says, that the main thing is still the sort of the normal thing. And I think there is a certain point to that we are talking about centers of excellence, which kind of the existence of one such. It's built on the assumption that there already is an interesting research area where there are excellent scientists working on that. So you need to have this undergrowth for the kind of free field of whatever.
So in a dream scenario, what would you ask for in terms of possibilities to strengthen your centers of excellence? What would be like a wish list? Pretending there's like a science Santa Claus, you could just write off a list too.
Well, for me, I think it would be carrying on with the direction that we've taken, but you might also then be thinking about renewal and going into other areas. So the University of Nottingham wouldn't be able to afford to carry on doing that indefinitely. But it would be great to be able to have that extra resource that you can continue to push after the new and to really be driving after solving big problems and coming together around them. And people are already asking, what's the next generation of these to come? And we will have to decide whether that's feasible or not. So yes, my dream would be that we can have continual cycles of this, not necessarily the same ones, but to continue to take new and different things forward in a very creative way.
Thank you. Henrik?
From the leadership, I wish long-term commitment and trust. A thumb in the eye about keeping quality and maintaining a continuous renewal process. But I would also like to have some brave decisions that actually we could do something to affect the recruitment on a broader front at the university, so that we don't just try to implement the centers of excellence in a constant, non-changing structure.
Mm-hmm. Professor Mella, you're smiling.
Mm-hmm. I found these answers to be both to be extremely good and really thinking that, okay, what could I add here? It's this sort of really the changing scenery that the centers of excellence should not be viewed as something which kind of goes from here to eternity, like the many of the disciplines have been around for this 400 or 500 years. So some sort of renewal, and really this idea also from the funding agency point of view that, okay, also the responsibility of the funding agency is not to fund a center of excellence from here to eternity. But renewal, one thing that we've also what we haven't talked about today, but which I find of interest, is the question of what is the size of a good center of excellence. So the Finnish experience is that they used to be 20 years ago much smaller than they are today. So and we tried to kind of find out what are the reasons. So one is that, okay, there is much more multidisciplinarity, but it might also be other reasons, and what is the sort of optimal size in a certain research area or certain research theme. We have had centers of excellence from about 20 people to I think 300 or 400, and that's quite a variation.
Mm-hmm. A good number?
I don't think that's a good number, because I think it depends on first what you mean by a center of excellence. I've been part of a Linneo center, which was much smaller than the strategic research area I'm part of now, but we actually have different objectives. One was more kind of a project where we had excellent people working together in a quite restricted scientific area, whereas the Beck area is a way to actually target really large complex questions where we need all these different disciplines that even goes across different universities, and we need to have a common infrastructure which is about how to work with stakeholders. That requires a volume to actually be able to fund things like that. So it depends on the kind of questions and how we approach the questions.
If I can comment,
Please.
yeah, exactly, and that's really the point, that, okay, it might be that the idea that there is a certain, like that, okay, when establishing flagships, there is the kind of idea that, okay, they might be about the same size still, but it's really that the aims and the goals, they determine, and the current status, they determine that what is a good size.
Yeah, I think I agree. I think it depends a bit on the nature of the entity itself, but it might also be helpful to think about sort of concentric circles. So you sort of have probably a leader and a core team that are working very actively on a defined program. You know, you think of your sort of laboratory equivalent in an interdisciplinary context, but then there are concentric circles of individual players in projects, programs, aspects of it, and then you will have national or international collaborations and other activities going on. So it depends on what you define the centre, you know, but it probably has a number of concentric circles of close involvement and looser involvement with it, and that will include stakeholders, business partners, innovation pathways. You know, there's all sorts of different kinds of activity that are likely to be going on. So I don't think there's a single answer. I think that the optimum size team was, you know, what's an optimum sort of research group that can be managed? You know, there's a word that sort of like might be 40 or something like that, but we're not talking about that kind of activity. We're talking about a much more complex set of projects and programs and different related activities than that sort of, you know, core research group sort of mindset, I think. So maybe that we're making an important distinction here between that.
Henrik Smith, what would you say is the what would be the pros and cons of multi-party collaboration within a center of excellence?
I mean, the pros are pretty obvious, because by having more than one partner university in a strategic research area, we can actually specialize between the universities and capitalize on different strengths in the different universities. This is what we did in Beck, where we didn't really have partners in the economic subjects at Lund University, but collaborated with Gothenburg University for that, and so on in different areas. So we can create a more comprehensive research environment and target the question we want to target, still then having sufficient critical mass at the different research groups. The cons comes mostly at the practical side. It comes on how actually to manage this as a single research area and create incentives to actually collaborate between the universities, to physically meet, for example. All those practicalities can be quite daunting, and you actually need to invest a lot of resources only to manage this as a multi-university organization. Adding to that, it's also complicated to act against more than one line organization. It's complicated enough to work with one line organization like Lund University. To work with against two line organization makes it even more daunting, and generates even more meetings and even more people you should network with. And this is said from my point of view, which is then the main partner. That is another problem, of course, if you are the junior partner in a collaboration, that you actually lose some momentum in actually steering the development of the environment.
Any comments?
No, I think you've said it. Yeah.
Let's take another Menti question. How to determine a good balance between basic research and policy relevant publication? Good questions.
Well, it's maybe a slightly different answer, but I'm very interested in the extent to which very basic research can be pulled through into use-inspired application. So it's not so much about the balance, but rather than to see these as separate things that don't relate and that you have to have them going on in different worlds, to look at the opportunity to say, align them not too far from each other so that you can get this pull through. So the example of working on electric propulsion for air flight, for example, it was very interesting that, as I say, the material chemists were not ever talking to the engineers and had never joined up their interests. Now that the materials chemists think that their new materials might be put to use in that context, they're working together really well, but it's still very fundamental work developing new materials. It hasn't changed the fundamental chemistry at all. It's just there's an opportunity here to direct that designing work in chemistry towards this particular application, and that's what I find as exciting. And so it's not sort of what's the balance, it's saying what's the opportunity here,
the common good that could benefit
that
society,
can come out of it. Yeah, it doesn't have to be, I mean, you don't want to force that, but in this instance it's such a productive kind of collaboration for new thought, even at the very sort of fundamental end.
Would you like to add, or should we move on? We have a few more questions. Great. Are we bold enough in defining common agenda with different partners towards the SDGs? Are we bold enough?
Are we bold enough to define the agenda, or are we bold enough to then do something? Writing research agendas is easier.
I mean, this may be me because I'm not personally having to do it all. I would like my colleagues to be even bolder than they are in terms of, the confidence of the steps they might take towards solving some of these huge challenges. It's very, very difficult to bring together lots of colleagues that think they want to do their own work, and how do you sort of meld that all together to genuinely be facing into these big complex challenges? And I would, if I could, I would be pushing them harder.
What stops you?
I'm needing to learn about the process with which you have to iterate those. What have we got? Who have we got? What are our capabilities? What are our interests? what we're prepared to do together, and how do we apply that into the problem. And I'm learning that that's not a simple process, and that it takes time, and it's about the right conditions, the right knowledge sets and applications being able to come together, and so that's kind of what stopped. And people probably aren't used to working in this way, so there's a lot of learning to go on for all of us, me included.
Thank you, Professor Smith.
I'm a little bit unclear what the question really implies, because we are working with setting research agendas across different organizations within academia, and that's pretty simple to do I mean, of course, complex to understand other sciences, and you have to compromise what you want to do sometimes to set common agendas. But if the question is about working with partners outside the university, I think we need to consider very carefully the ethical problems too, because we would like to work closely with society so that our research has an impact, but we also want to maintain the scientific independence and integrity. So we are not working unconditionally with partners outside the universities. We always want to maintain our ability to make our own decisions. And I think this is an area we need in at times where much more, for example, in the Horizon funding is focused on transdisciplinary research. And every researcher will have to go into this to get large research money. I think this is something we need to discuss much, much more, how we maintain our scientific integrity when we are working closely with, for example, industrial partners when it comes to environmental questions.
Thank you, Professor Møller. I'd like to add a question to this one. In terms of working with societal engagement, do we work enough involving other partners? Maybe not corporations or companies, but more civil society in this process of transformation of society that universities do address. Henrik, would you like to answer that one?
I don't think we work enough with it. We need to work much more to find ways to actually communicate our science. There was some discussion before about if papers were cited in policy documents. I wouldn't expect them to be that. I wouldn't expect them to be read even. We need to find a way how we actually synthesize our knowledge across border areas and actually then communicate the border synthesis in a way that is scientifically sound to begin with, but also efficient in terms of being understood by decision makers. I think we need to put a lot more resources into that.
I think it's a really exciting area. I mean, in the Rights Lab, they have citizens looking at satellite images in order to help that analysis. So there's citizen science agendas going on there, working with former government ministers from Brazil to think about population needs in Brazil. You know, so there's a lot going on, but actually it does take a level of resource. It's time consuming, and it does cost money, and it costs money for citizens to participate, actually, particularly less enfranchised citizens. You know, they can't just afford to walk into a university. They need travel costs, they need time out of work. You know, so it's not to be underestimated, but very, very important.
Yes, please.
Obviously, there is a lot of difference between different disciplines in these. At least in Finland, the one big difference is then between the universities and the government research institutes, where the kind of the research institutes, they put a lot of effort. They work under the different ministries, and that's part of their job, kind of communicating then. And they are actually extremely good at that. So here again, that it probably is that it's not the case that every university professor should be doing that half time, but it's that some people are extremely good at that, and then kind of figuring out that what is the good way of organizing this is important.
We are measured on it. Universities in the UK are measured on public engagement, community interaction, business interaction. There's an annual survey, and we are ranked, and we get some funding on the basis of how well we do.
And where could you find these numbers?
Research England, part of the UK Research and Innovation, publish that survey every year. It's called HEBCIS, HEBCIS. And all universities are now going to be part of a knowledge exchange framework. So we will be we will have that published every year in 5 or 6 target plots to show how we're doing. So it's another new way of measuring universities, but it's it's a good thing.
Let's take one final question. We have 5 more minutes to go. Does specialization in COE constrain mobility between universities, at least nationally and in the long run?
Constrain mobility. I would have thought it's doing the opposite.
It's not an easy question.
Yeah, I would have thought because it's making us expand our activity and recruit individuals, work with each other. I would hope that it does the opposite to constrain mobility.
So the question might refer to the case where there is a, let's say, the only research group in the country which is looking at a certain thing, which is very relatively limited. But as you pointed out, typically these centers of excellence, they kind of involve people from different disciplines, and in that way they might even make national mobility easier.
There is actually one more question connected to this one, so let's just round this off. As research infrastructures were mentioned briefly, should there be a connection to centers of excellence funding?
I could give what. So our beacons are enabling us to define asks for very large research infrastructures from government, because in 2 of our beacons they have been very clear about what big infrastructure facility they would want to put at the heart of their work. And because of that, that enables people like me to then start making the case to government for that. And we've got a long way. We haven't quite got them yet, but we certainly have used it to make the case. So one is about ultra high field MRI facility, a national facility, and another one is about a megawatt test facility for electric propulsion, which again, both of those would be the only in Europe of the kind that they are. So fingers crossed that coronavirus doesn't destroy the economy and we won't be able to have them. Yeah.
Well, Henrik, please.
When the Swedish strategic research areas were founded once upon a time, the infrastructure money was deliberately left out of that funding. But still, the research areas in Lund plays a very large role in applying for and maintaining infrastructures. So even if the road is not directed through that funding, the existence of the centers generates an increased ability to actually generate infrastructures and maintain them. I could wish for a more systematic way to approach this, because infrastructure funding in Sweden is becoming more and more complicated, and that requires a sort of university-wide strategy how to handle them. And I see here Stacey looks at me, which is a problem much larger than what the SRAs alone can handle.
Well, thank you very much, all 3 of you, for sharing your insights with us and the people watching the live cast. And let's give them all a warm hand of applause to send them off. And now, please welcome back on stage Pro Vice Chancellor for your final concluding reflections.
Well, first, I would just want to thank all of our speakers for not only coming here, but really contributing different perspectives from different countries, different systems, and also from different levels in the system. And I think it gave all of us a lot of inspiration and a lot of ideas. And I'm really pleased with your contributions today. And it's difficult to really summarize everything here, but I did like Bab's short statement. It's really important to know thyself and to concentrate on doing things that you're really good at. And I think we have a pretty good idea of what our strengths are, but I think we can know ourselves better. And this also applies even to working towards the SDGs. Choose the ones which are appropriate, focus on the ones where you think you really can make a difference. And then how to make a difference. I think there are a lot of different ideas, a lot of different approaches, and they depend on, I guess, where we start, where we want to go, and who we are. So different centers of excellence have very different challenges, and maybe the distance also to the stakeholders is sometimes very different and sometimes very different to even gauge. But I think we have a couple of very good examples within Lund Center of Excellence that we can learn from. But I think that a lot of thought around where to put our effort and how to really develop a good understanding of how to package our research and whether we want to package it in a different way than we're doing already today could be useful. I was really interested about the different approaches to dialogue with government and also the role of government. So we had a representative from a funding agency, which certainly gets the money from the government, just as we do at universities, but still the government is a different organization. And I think there is a trend to have less confidence in the decisions of the government. We see many signs of that, and that we also do not like it when the government tries to point out exactly what we should do research on. And that was one of the things that I think was a stumbling block for the Swedish Strategic Research Area Initiative. But on the other hand, the government can also open the door for this kind of quite remarkable activity, which is an agent for change. And we've seen many good examples of that today. Recruitment is definitely one of my pet peeves or pet areas, and I was happy to hear this from actually many of us from the university perspective in Lund, from the university in Nottingham, and also from the funding agencies reflecting on this is the role of the university, and this is something we need to take seriously, but this is also, I think, one of our most powerful agents for change, for changing not only research, profiling, but also even education. And that centers of excellence are not just about research. I think that's very clear for everybody in the room. But how we can really use centers of excellence also to make education attractive, in order to profile our university, not only research on the national level, but really on a much broader level. I think this is something we need to think about more in Lund. And the question of trust came up also in many different contexts. Trust is what we need to build with the government. Trust is also what we need to build with our stakeholders, but also in Lund, I think that trust between university leadership, faculty leadership, and the centers of excellence is a foundation for everything that we are doing here. And this is absolutely important. And things can happen that can challenge that trust, and we have to continuously be aware of what these things can be. Leadership is a very important thing. I think I knew that from the beginning, but we've also understood that centers of excellence are not just research groups, they're not just research projects, and that means that leadership has to maybe think in a different way and has to have not only a strong vision, but also the ability to bring in a lot of different people with maybe different point of view and different starting points to work on the same, towards the same goal. And this is not the same kind of leadership that we have in a research group or maybe even in a university leadership position. So the focus on leadership, I think that's also a very, very important aspect. Cement versus renewal was also a theme that came up in a few different ways. I don't think anybody wants to see in 2030 that we have strategic research areas in Lund that look exactly the same as they did in 2009 when the applications were written. But how to renew and how to grow and how to also be able to address the changes taking place outside of the university. I think this is a challenge that we have to learn how to deal with. And the fact that often external forces, for example, the plateau effect, where we all of a sudden have to make decisions on what do we have to take away in order to do something new. This is difficult and necessary sometimes, that maybe it doesn't have to be so drastic. But all in all, I think it's been a really interesting afternoon, and I think that we've seen many reasons why centers of excellence or larger research environments are a necessary element for university research, but also for really going outside of the borders of the university and also across the borders of our sometimes very well-defined disciplines that have survived for 400, 500, 600 years. So these are really an absolutely necessary element for renewal and for change. And I guess on that note, I just want to say that I'm very optimistic about how the Lund Centers of Excellence or the strategic research areas have developed during the last 5 years. And I'm very impressed by the leadership and by the vision of the people who are leading our centers. And I look forward to continuing this very fruitful dialogue within Lund. Thanks.
Thank you very much. And now, ladies and gentlemen, we have refreshments in the foyer. Before we leave, I'd like to just remind you that you can watch the webcast afterwards at lu.se. And you will have the presentations sent out to you after the conference in due time. So thank you very much for your participation and for your great work, and see you outside. Bye-bye.